morning, everyone. This is Paul at VITA. Thank you for joining us for our VITA Learning webinar this morning. I would like to welcome Dr. Julian Conejo, who obtained his DDS in Costa Rica in 2005 and his prosthodontic training in Mexico in 2008. He's a visiting scholar at the Department of Preventative and Restorative Sciences, University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. He practices clinical dentistry and conducts extensive research at UPenn, and from his research and experience has written several peer-reviewed articles and studies. Today, he is joining us to talk about porcelain laminate veneers. So it's a pleasure to have him with us today. Before I turn things over to him, I just want to go through a couple of quick things. I just want to let you guys know that there's a lot of us today, so your phones will be on mute. So if you guys have questions, please put questions. There's a little question box over on the side. So please type your questions in there. I will try and keep an eye on them, and we will try and save some time to answer your questions at the end of the program. The workshop is recorded, so we will make that available to you after we're done. And also for CE, you guys will receive an email that will direct you how to get your CE credits and all of that. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Dr. Conejo. And let's make you the presenter here. It's a pleasure to have you, Doc.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys, and welcome to everyone joining us today. And very excited to talk with you guys about porcelain laminate veneers, one of my favorite topics for sure. So thanks again. So we're gonna get started, and after discussing with the team at VITA North America, they wanted me today to focus on porcelain laminate veneers. And as I said, it's one of my favorite treatments and treatment modalities because of its conservative approach. That's the main thing with laminate veneers. And the more we can treat vital teeth with laminate veneers and just leave those full coverage crowns whenever we are replacing failing existing full coverage crowns or endo-treated teeth in the anterior zone with, let's say, average or wide access for that endo treatment. That would be my only, let's say, indications of full coverage crowns, and all the rest of the restorations that I treat in the anterior dentition, or let's extend to bicuspids, I would go for porcelain laminate veneers for sure. So I do a lot of these type of restorations, and today I would like to share multiple clinical cases and try to keep this as clinically relevant as possible. So we'll get started, and at the end, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Okay, so when we discuss about the different materials that we have for porcelain laminate veneers, basically every material out there for indirect restorations could be used for this, and that doesn't mean that that's the ideal, right? So that's important for us to understand that not because a material says it's indicated for veneers, that might be the best option for your patient and for yourself as a clinician or a laboratory technician. Today I will focus most of the cases when we do the lab side as well, mostly with the chairside digital workflow. And at the end, I'm going to show one case done with a laboratory technician to try to show a little bit of both options, the chairside digital workflow on veneers and the Connect digital workflow with a dental technician. So for me, everything starts on treatment planning, right? And I always need to make some extraoral photos first. And the photo on the left side, the frontal view at a high smile, where I can see the incisal edges of the maxillary dentition is the most important photo for the planning stage, for the digital wax-up. If you want to take lateral view and 12 o'clock view, in some of the softwares, for example, the DSD app, it will help you orient your STL pre-op scans with the patient's face better from the three perspectives, so we can, let's say, replace the use of the Facebook when we were doing analog workflows. This way, if the patient has a cant towards one side or the other, we have that model in that ideal position, and then we can compensate with the digital wax-up. So for me, this photo documentation, extraoral and intraoral, plus the STL files of the intraoral scans are one of the most important aspects for success with porcelain laminate veneers. Then when you have the intraoral images, you will make basically the intraoral scan here and make sure that the scan is very clean, not only on the facial aspect of the tooth, but on the interproximal surfaces, very important. And also make sure you scan at least 5 millimeters of soft tissue. And with that, then if we decide to go and do a digital wax-up and print a model, we can have enough information there to create a body matrix and move forward with our high aesthetic mock-up, which is fundamental for the success of this type of partial coverage restorations. So what you see here are the STL files, whatever intraoral scanner you have. Nowadays in 2022, all of them have the ability to export those STL files that we really need. If your lab technician works with the same system that you're using in your scanner, maybe you don't have to go through this step. But if your lab technician is using a different system, let's say you have a CEREC and your lab technician is using the ExoCAD software, for example, then in my CEREC system, after doing the impressions, I will hit export as STL file. Just one comment, we just published a paper in the Journal of Aesthetic and Restorative Dentistry that we compared high quality export of STL, medium quality export of STL, and lower quality export of STL. And actually there's not a significant or detrimental difference. So my suggestion when you're acquiring the data for treatment planning, I would just export this as a lower quality of STL file. This will make it much easier to upload, to send this through any cloud service or even email, or whatever way you want to send this out to make things easier to export and share. So that's something I was always, let's say, worried if doing the low quality STL with, let's say, affect, but we've shown it right now that it's not really something that we should be worried about, and that way this part will be much more practical. So then once we've shared the photos and the STL files of the intraoral situations, then I would suggest that the lab technician starts doing these initial digital wax-up for you guys. Here is just one example. This is the DSD app. We also use the SmileFly app, or you can do this digital wax-up in whatever laboratory software. But what I want to show here is the importance of the correlation of the photo of the patient and the position of the maxillary arch. Why? Because if you don't have this information, this facial information, your lab technician won't be able to actually place that model on the screen in the same position of the patient, and then you can come up with a mock-up that is not really accurate or not really helpful. So these are very important aspects to consider when we're talking about aesthetics. It's not just, you know, taking STL files and that to the lab and let them do the wax-up. We want to make sure that we have the visibility of the lip, how high that smile is, and from there we will start idealizing the plan. So here we can do a 2D design very quickly just to show the patient an approximate situation or scenario of what we could do. And of course, we will be actually doing a 3D digital wax-up where we were going to select a library of teeth, three-dimensional library of teeth, and overlay them over the existing teeth. And of course, here we will notice if we're doing just an additive treatment, which would be less invasive, much more conservative, or we would have areas that I need to reduce tooth structure to maybe correct misalignment or teeth that are rotated. And then those are also very valuable information for the clinician because we know where we need to create the space needed. Do I do all the digital wax-ups myself? To be honest, not really. I just try to make sure I collect the data perfectly and send that out to the lab. I consult with the patient. What's the main complaint? What's bothering from the aesthetic aspect, and make sure that I'm able to also discuss that with the planning team, with the lab technician, and then we move forward. So once we have the digital wax-up, we will receive that file as an STL. And if you have a printer in-house, you can just 3D print that in a model resin. Or if you don't have one yet, then you will receive the package from the lab with that 3D printed model that is going to be extremely useful. So now with the technologies, I try to invest more time here in the treatment planning phase. So when I go to the chair, I can work more fluent, to say it in a way. So here you see the TST model obtained in an STL file, and that's what we go ahead and 3D print. Okay, as I was saying, it's important not only to scan the facial aspect, but also a band of 5 millimeters of soft tissue cervically from the teeth. So then we can have more information and create a clean putty matrix. And here, what I'm trying to do is not only making a putty shell, but also injecting a light body impression material. So I make this in 2 steps. First, I make this putty matrix, and then I inject the light body impression material to basically reline that putty matrix and make sure that I'm copying all the details. Once we do just the putty matrix, maybe it's not copying in the inner proximal, and then your mock-up or your provisional won't be as perfect as possible. And then we will be cutting it very close to the cervical margins. And once we cut that, we will create also some cuts on the cervical embrasures so the material can flow out. And then you can see here the putty matrix, it's relined with the light body, it's in an intimate contact with the printed model, and now we're ready to go ahead and inject the viscera material and create these mock-up. So because we share the information of the patient's face, we know that the incisal edge position is in a nice harmony with the lip. We see the interincisal embrasures open and natural, dominance from the centrals. And once the patient has evaluated these and the patient is happy with this design, it's very important that we take out our scanner and scan it one more time. Why? Because many times here I'm perfecting this mock-up by using maybe a supplex disc or a very thin disc to individualize a little bit between the teeth, or maybe around the incisal edges or the tips of the canines. And once you've optimized your mock-up, you want to make sure you take your scanner and scan it again. And here it's very important to have this file in the same file where you would be actually scanning your preps if you do want to go with a biocopy. A biocopy is if you want to maintain this exact same shape, you will need to make a line around this restoration one by one. So this will give you a better correlation, a better matching if you decide to go that way as biocopy. The other important aspect here to understand before we head into the clinical cases and the veneers is that if I have a patient with a gummy smile and I'm planning to create a crown lengthening procedure, I want to give my periodontist the exact information where my future cervical margin will be positioned. So what I'm doing here, I'm overlapping on the pre-op STL, the STL of the digital wax-up. So you can see there where we are needing to remove some soft tissue on tooth number 9 and number 10 to try to emulate the dimensions of teeth number 7 and 8. The nice thing here is that with the interdisciplinary approach, the periodontist can also correlate this with the CBCT. That's what I titled the digital clone. And there we can see where the bone is. So this will give a very nice reference to the team if this is just a soft tissue modification that it's needed, or we need to do bone remodeling as well. So when we design these surgical guide for crown lengthening, we can also have the constant of the biological width. So you can see here that from where we want the position of the cervical margin, we add 3 millimeters or whatever the periodontist considers that needs to remove. So the periodontist has those references. So I could take 15-20 minutes more just explaining this, but in detail, it's just showing the advantages of digital dentistry for interdisciplinary treatment planning prior to the porcelain laminate veneers procedure. Okay, so there's many materials out there for the elaboration of laminate veneers, and we will go through some of the examples. But what I always like to emphasize is on the quality of the tooth preparation. Many colleagues have asked me in the past, like, I've done some chairside CAD/CAM veneers, whether it's CEREC or Planmeca chairside CAD/CAM systems, but I don't love the marginal adaptation. I prefer the pressables when I send them to the lab. And basically, it comes to this. This is a great paper by Dr. Walter Rini, where he compared different preps, divided them in poor quality, fair quality, good quality, and excellent quality. And then they scanned those preps and made those restorations and measured the marginal adaptation. And basically, they found that the preparation quality has a significant impact on the gap on the margin, regardless of whatever CAD/CAM system was used. So we need to understand that we need to prep better when we're doing veneers to get a excellent marginal adaptation, but it is totally possible. So I would like to go through some of those details. When we created our bird block with Brasler, we were focusing on trying to create a system to prep the teeth that depended or considered enamel. Why? Because we know that if we have more enamel, there's going to be stronger bonding and longer bonding. So we will be more successful when we create porcelain laminate veneers. So we try to create one line for the burrs indicated for the veneers, and we actually have 4 burrs, as you can see on the screen. We have a very thin burr whenever we need to open the contact interproximally without touching the adjacent tooth. We have the LV S2 burr that has a depth cut stop at 0.3 of a millimeter only, because that's the thickness of the enamel on the cervical portion. And then we have the third burr to create our chamfer or finish line, and then an ultra-fine yellow diamond burr just to soften the incisal edge or the line angles inside the preparation. And for doing this, it's important to use your mirror and not only see the tooth from the facial aspect, but with your mirror from the incisal aspect to make sure that we don't have any sharp areas, because if there's any sharp area, the milling machine will need to over mill, and that will create thinner restorations in some aspects or minimal thickness warnings. So with this burr block, you can prep all your veneers, all your crowns, all your inlays, onlays, overlays. And also it's important to emphasize on having instruments that help you pack that retraction cord without harming or being too aggressive, so we don't finish with irreversible soft tissue migration, because that would be catastrophic for the success of our laminate veneers. And this other instrument, I really like it. It's from the partial extraction therapy kit from Brasler, and this helps us also protect the papilla while we are refining the margin. Okay, so remember that no sharp angles for crowns, but also no sharp angles for porcelain laminate veneers. And when we use this sequence of a medium burr and then a fine diamond burr to prep, we are able to have margin adaptations, as you see here. I milled here some enamic crowns for this study, and we could have even 11 microns of the gap between the restoration and the tooth. So it is possible to achieve excellent marginal adaptations with chairside CAD/CAM systems. What is important is that we understand how to prep and what does the software likes that our preparations have regarding the features, the morphology, the geometry of the preps. So I want to show cases with hybrid ceramics, part of the resin matrix ceramics group. I'll show you cases from the feldspathic ceramics, which is what I use most of the time. Also with the new lithium silicate ceramics, I'll show you some options there, and finishing with one on extra translucent zirconia. So here what we use is the dynamic hybrid ceramic because it's a material that is not so elastic like composite materials, so it has a models of elasticity between human dentin and enamel. So if we treat it well, if it has sufficient thickness, it can bond strongly and we can be successful with this. It has great machinability, as we saw in the SEM images. So when would I use a hybrid ceramic material for veneers? In young patients that don't want to have any type of preparation. This material mills smoother than feldspathic materials. That 14% of composite will make it possible to mill those margins basically at 0.2 of a millimeter, 0.3, like a contact lens, super thin. And the only thing that you gotta think about when you wanna do prepless is to evaluate if the tooth has a totally, let's say, convergent shape towards the incisal edge. Here, these centrals are very healthy. We want an additive technique, right, to close the diastemas, to lengthen a little bit the incisal edge, but the tooth has this type of triangular shape, so I do need to create a path of insertion for the restorations. Is this totally prepless? No. What happens here is that basically I don't have a margin, but I'm creating a path of insertion for my laminate veneer. That's what we need to think every time we're prepping these type of restorations. Here we can mill this very smooth, very thin, and that's great of having that percentage of composite infiltrated on the feldspathic ceramic block. So how to bond enamic, I was able to publish this in JPD, and basically this is a hybrid ceramic that requires hydrofluoric acid etching for 60 seconds, okay? We're going to be removing part of the glassy matrix and create this nice irregular surface, and then we will apply a silane coupling agent. A traditional silane will provide us the chemical bonding of the resin to the material, so we can combine micromechanical retentions by the effect of the hydrofluoric acid etching for 1 minute and the chemical bonding that the silane will have towards the silica-based part of this hybrid ceramic material. Remember, never deliver an enamic restoration if you haven't etched it. It requires hydrofluoric acid etching for 1 minute. And then we need to also understand that each bonding interface has two sides, right? One side is the tooth and the other side is the ceramic material. And many times I've received emails or text messages like, I had a debonding on a veneer, and everyone is always blaming the material, but we gotta be aware that debonding could come also from the tooth side. So that's why it's important to always use a rubber dam, as you see here. Then we are going to always etch the enamel with phosphoric acid for 20 seconds, rinse well, dry very well. We're not working on dentin here, so we can dry the enamel, and then we will go ahead and apply the bonding agent. In this case, I'm cementing these veneers with a Panavia V5 that has the tooth primer But whatever resin cement system you're using for veneers, it's important that it has a bonding agent. So we're going to apply it here, air thin it, and make sure you air thin it properly so it doesn't leave a thick film that could affect the final sealing of your veneers. And then you just follow the instructions. If they need to cure it, you cure it. Some of them, they don't have to be cured, but you're going to get a higher conversion rate if you do cure those teeth with the thin layer of the bonding agent. So then for the adhesive cementation of the veneers, I always like to work with the centrals first, and we will practice the insertion axis, then apply the cement and place both, pass the floss through the proximal contact, hold them in position, use your brushes to remove as much resin cement before actually tack curing. I do less and less tack curing and more cleaning when the cement is still very soft and gentle. And then you can see a nice final outcome. This is resin matrix ceramic material, VITA hybrid ceramic, bonded with Panavia V5. We are almost doing a prepless technique in this case, basically just recontouring the teeth to create a path of insertion. And for veneers, you can have a vertical path of insertion or a horizontal path of insertion also. And we will see this in the next cases where we do more tooth preparation. Feldspathic ceramics, they've been here for many, many years, as we all know, and they are multichromatic. They have a high content of glassy matrix, and they're the ones that look more similar to natural teeth. They're actually my favorite material for porcelain laminate veneers. VITA has now launched the VITA Blocks Trilux Forte for bleaching colors, which big majority of our patients population are looking to this type of brighter teeth. So important to understand that if you want to do feldspathic ceramic veneers, they are the most translucent material. So if you're thinking to create a restoration that it's 0.3 or 0.4 of a millimeter, and one of those department teeth is very discolored, might not be the best material for you in that specific situation. We need to understand, same as enamic, must be adhesively bonded. And the nice thing here is a polychromatic block, not like a lithium disilicate that it's monochromatic. This is polychromatic, so we don't need to only stain the external part. The difference between the thirds in the restoration will come from the inside. So that's why I always try to only use polychromatic blocks for porcelain laminate veneers. The other use that I give to this material, I'm not getting into that today, but of course our anterior crowns, and also some thickness is needed to be able to have the best clinical outcomes. So this is a case I did with one of my DMD students maybe 4 to 5 years ago, and the patient had had some orthodontic treatment and maybe never used her retainers, or the treatment was not stable, and there was already some diastemas again and some inclination. And you can see also some asymmetries on the cervical margins and a lot of roughness when they remove the brackets without being very delicate. So I don't see why we always say that ortho is the most conservative treatment if sometimes the enamel is damaged on the outside. So what we do, as I just showed you in the first treatment planning example, printed model, or in this case, maybe it was a wax stone model, create a putty matrix that it's relined, then make this preparation guide. So when it's the mock-up, I spend a lot of time detailing the cervical portion and everything when the patient wants to leave for a few days with the mock-up. If patient comes back for the preparation appointment and I'm not doing, and the patient was not wearing the mock-up, then I will just put some flowable and put it in. It's basically an unfinished mock-up, what you see here, and that's the prep guide. I will prep with the depth cut burrs on the facial aspect, making those 3 lines, and then I will use a mechanical pencil and mark in that area that has been cutted, that depth groove or that channel there. And then I will use my normal burr to prep veneers, to prep the mock-up on the facial aspect, very important, following the 3 planes. Then I will create some incisal marks of 1 millimeter, so we have a homogeneous incisal thickness. This is very important, so whenever we're doing the finalization of the laminate veneers, we have ceramic there that it's even between all the teeth, and we can have a nice halo effect and have some area for adding some stains in that region. So you can see here the preparations. Basically, we do 60–70% of the preparation through the mock-up. Then we use a perio curette to remove the excess of bisacryl that it's there, and then we just go ahead and mark the finish line. I like to place the 000 retraction cord, and with the 000 retraction cord in position, I will then smooth the chamfer. This margin might have a width of 0.3 to 0.4 of a millimeter. Important here is to see what we call the elbow of the prep. I don't see my mouse on the screen, maybe because I'm sharing the screen, but basically the elbow is this part that you see when cervical meets the proximal surface of the tooth, and that part is the most important, that we push towards the palatal aspect. The elbow of the veneer prep needs to be prepped slightly more towards the palatal aspect, so we can have a nice emergence profile and avoid any type of black triangles. Okay, then in the incisal edges, you always want to involve the incisal edge, but you don't want to wrap around the palatal aspect. This will reduce the path of insertion, so we just soften the transition from the facial to the incisal edge where the veneer will be actually sitting. And because we're working with very thin restorations, I like to also take the shade of the preparations, because if I'm planning to do 0.3, 0.4 laminate veneers and the patient is in a D3 or a 3.5 and I'm looking to change it to a B1, with that limited thickness, it's going to be challenging. Okay, so that's something important to consider. Then you see here, this case was done in the CEREC system 4 or 5 years ago, still the CEREC 4 software. We place the veneer inside the block and we can play with it. It's important to take a screenshot on how you position number 8 when you are milling number 9, so they are very symmetric how they are positioned inside the block. And then this is what I always try to explain, that we all need to practice more. We all need to take more hands-on courses on finishing veneers, on staining and glazing and marking the line angles and marking the texture and all those important things, because no matter what CAD/CAM system you have, it will give you something that is raw, and we got to finish it with our hands or our assistant or our lab technician. So this is where the magic happens. This is where we got to become confident and understand what we are doing. I like to use the VITA Accent Plus stain and glaze system, and they have one glaze called the finishing agent, which has a smaller particle size, and I really like it because it's not a very thick and highly glossy glaze. Actually, it maintains the texture and it looks even more natural. So here, after glazing the feldspathic ceramic blocks with the Accent Plus, after doing the trying, we clean this in the ultrasonic in alcohol for 3 minutes and then apply hydrofluoric acid etching. So same as the V-dynamic, the feldspathic ceramic blocks, the restoration from those blocks need to be acid etched for 1 minute, washed and dry, and then apply the silane coupling agent. A conventional silane will work perfectly for feldspathic ceramics. In this case, I'm using the Panavia V5, which is called Ceramic Primer Plus, but it's basically a silane coupling agent in there. And then remember that we need to protect the tooth side. So here you can see I'm clamping the canines, I'm inverting the dam on the centrals and the laterals, and everything looks dry. This is the only way I can really have good control when I etch one tooth at a time, so I don't have the risk of over etching. You can use Teflon tape to protect the adjacent teeth, so there's no over etching in any part of the abutment tooth. After drying, when I apply the bonding agent, And then, as I said in last case, we've got to practice the path of insertion. And this is a really nice photo because it shows that this veneer has a 45-degree path of insertion from facial to palatal, from incisal to cervical, and this is how I want to actually place the veneer on the tooth once I place the composite resin cement. So this is what we like when we do the biocopy option, that we actually are cloning nature, because the morphology of these teeth comes from a natural library of teeth, right? Not all the cases we go with biocopy. Sometimes we just use the mock-up as a reference, and then we use another, let's say, library or another software to design the veneers, but it's important to have that information always available. So you can see here only 4 VITA Trilux Forte laminate veneers from 7 to 10, and glazed with VITA Accent Plus finishing agent. And I think that the aesthetic results are very nice. Now I want to show you a case that I finished maybe 2 months ago during this semester with one of our senior students. This patient was complaining between the overlap of number 8 with number 7, and how dark number 7 looked because of its more palatal position. And she wanted to improve the overall aesthetics of her anterior maxillary teeth. So here in this situation, I'm also evaluating that there's a slight soft tissue recession on number 10, and we can make slight tissue modifications from a prosthetic point of view and correct this without always needing to go for a more invasive flap surgery when the correction is minimum. So I always try to select the shade at the beginning of the appointment, and you can see that these teeth are actually very bright and patient wants slightly brighter. So that's why it's great to have the VITA Trilux Forte in 0M1, for example, whenever we have young patients trying to improve the color. So on the right side, you see the preparations, and I want to focus here on the lateral maxillary right tooth. It will be number 7. You can see how the cervical margin of number 7 now is almost at the same level of number 8. So basically that day I used a scalpel blade and make the modification of the soft tissue position, maybe removing 1 millimeter of soft tissue, then I pack a 000 cord, and then I pack a second cord in that tooth, soaked in hemostatic agent that I'm going to remove, and then immediately go ahead and scan. This way, if I support the tissue with the bisagra material for the provisional, I'm going to maintain the soft tissue in that position, and I'm going to improve that soft tissue architecture without going for a very invasive periodontal approach. When is this possible? When I use the perioprobe to measure and I have 3 millimeters at least of tissue between the cervical margin and the bone, because I can, let's say, cheat and remove 1 millimeter and still will have some good space for that biological width. If I'm probing and I feel that the bone is right there at 2 millimeters, I wouldn't do this, because then I will be violating this biologic width. So those are things that I do during the preparation appointment to improve the soft tissue architecture. And then you see number 10 is actually receded. So I don't want to pack heavy core there. I don't want to actually place the margin that deep, because that will only help recede more. So there I'm staying a little bit shy from the cervical margin position, but on number 7, I'm pushing the tissue up and going subgingival after, and then removing that little bit of gum there. So here, this is what I like to envision. What's the path of insertion? How is this restoration going to be inserted on the tooth? And when you're working in the CERC software, for example, you can check the path of insertion and you'll have like yellow warnings if you have retentive areas. So make sure you always evaluate that. And if you gotta go back, it's better go back right there and re-prep. You see a space between 9, and 10. And that's because I found some caries. I saw some caries when I was prepping the restoration. So that would be the only reason why I'm going through the proximal contact surface there. And then we do the same protocol, polish the veneers, remove the spruce, mark the line angles, and then do the stain and glaze. This is the same feldspathic ceramic material. The only variation that it's the 0M1, the new blocks. And you can see this is only 1 week after the delivery of the 4 porcelain laminate veneers, and we have improved the soft tissue position of the cervical margins. Still, the papilla needs to completely seal that space between 7 and 8. And I did 2 direct composite restorations on 6 and 11 to idealize the position of the canines and have a nicer final result. So we combine direct composites with indirect ceramics for these types of situations. Then we have the lithium silicate ceramic material group, which have a higher filler content. They are stronger in general, and they can be more opacious. So when I would use any of these materials like VITA Suprinity, for example, lithium disilicate, etc., when I have a combination case like this one here, I have endodontically treated tooth on number 8 and diastemas and some chipping on the adjacent teeth. So I'm doing a crown on number 8 and 5 veneers. So the crown is going to be thicker, and the veneers, of course, will have much thinner dimensions because I want to stay on enamel. So here I want a material that has a lower translucency. The silicate ceramic materials can be selected in LT as a lower translucent material. So that's what I would do here. We will prep this tooth for a crown, place a retraction cord, and then smooth the finish line with the 8847 KR burr that is in our burr block to have that internal rounded shoulder, but still giving those 0.8 of material thickness. So this is a nice screenshot that I really like because you can see that the veneers have a very controlled reduction based on our final plan, right? And then of course number 8, that's a full coverage restoration due to the width of the endodontic treatment. And if you're using Suprinity or whatever other lithium silicate, you need less etching time. 20 seconds is sufficient because there's actually less glassy matrix and more crystalline phase, so 20 seconds, and then apply a silane coupling agent. So for these type of combination cases, I think that this group could be used, but in more ideal situations, I would avoid this group of materials and use more feldspathic ceramic blocks like VITA Trilux Forte, as I show you in the past case. This is a publication we did last semester with Telmo Santos, an excellent dental technician from Brazil, now residing in Miami. And here I had a very complicated situation. And after discussing with the patient, very fancy treatment plan options, interdisciplinary approach, and so on, the patient just told me that he wanted his teeth finished before going for Christmas break to Mexico, and that's it. So we got to consider patients' plans, patients' interests, and try to adapt with the best dentistry possible. So his patient had finished the traditional periodontal treatment, but of course you can see the sequela with soft tissue loss, diastemas, additionally the severe discoloration, fluorosis, and not all the patients agree on doing soft tissue grafting, orthodontics to help the prosthetic outcome. So sometimes we also need to think that more is less and less is more. In this case, I decided to go for a prosthetic approach, making 2 crowns on 8 and 9 and 4 veneers to treat 6, 7, 10, and 11. So here, the same workflow, we always take those photos, we correlate those STL files with the images, and then we just start playing with the proportions. Aesthetic dentistry is about space distribution, and then once we have that printed model, we create a putty matrix, and then we move forward. What I want to show you here as a variation is that I did 2 full coverage crowns on 8 and 9. Why? Because the diastema is very wide, and the soft tissue modification needs to be done, let's say, more aggressively. So with laminate veneer, I'm not going to be able to push the tissue from the palatal proximal surface. Well, if I create a full coverage restoration, more subgingival, I'm able to compensate for that bone loss and soft tissue modification. So sometimes in the softwares for clinical use, we don't have the ability to work with natural teeth libraries, but there are some aspects as a clinician that I want the lab to know, and it's basically the position of the incisal edges and the position of the proximal contact points. We all know that from my proximal contact point to the bone, if I have a distance of 5 millimeters, I'm going to assure a papilla closure. But if that contact point in the proximal surface is basically 7 millimeters or more, I'm not going to have a papilla closure there. So this is important that I do an initial design, then send that to the lab so the lab can actually maintain those biological concepts of the design of my restorations, while they can fine-tune and do what they are great at, making this look much more aesthetic. And then they can send me the file again, and I could mill them in-house, or they can do the final restorations and just send me the finished project. So here we merge from Sarek InLab then to ExoCAD, and then Telmo is basically stamping the texture on the facial aspect of these teeth to finish with something much more natural. So here I think it's a nice final outcome, correcting these diastemas, these soft tissue issues with 6 ceramic restorations, 2 crowns on the centrals, and 4 laminate veneers. Okay, and then another case we did with Telmo, and we were able to publish recently in Compendium, is what we call the CAD press technique. And basically what we're doing now is combining some digital workflows with some traditional workflows that work very, very nicely, and can actually reduce the production cost for the lab. So I had this patient that she was, of course, not happy with her aesthetics on the facial aspect of her maxillary teeth. You can see those non-carious cervical lesions. This is a multifactorial lesion. And as we do in our protocol, we take initial scans, upper, lower, and buccal, then take the photos as I showed you, then send this for a digital wax-up, whether it's the ExoCAD or InLab or whatever software. You can add a portrait photo of the pre-op situation to correlate this with the model to have the reference of the patient's face. And then here, what Telmo did was actually he 3D printed the designed veneers, and then we used the newer VITA Zirconia reinforced silicate ceramic material, which is a pressable material. So here, the cost of each of these restorations is way less compared to milling them from a block. And of course, this is a combined workflow from the clinician and the laboratory technician, right? This is what we call the connect workflow, where I'm doing just the scans and photos initially, then doing the mock-up preparations and sending the file of my digital final impression, and the lab is taking over for the production of these types of restorations. So for Vita Ambria, we also need to etch with hydrofluoric acid for 20 seconds and then apply a silent coupling agent. Same way that we've been bonding lithium disilicate, we will be bonding the Vita Ambria restorations. Nowadays in the market, we see the cleaners. They will help remove any debris after hydrofluoric acid etching. It's nothing that it's really needed with the traditional approach of etching, washing, water spray, ultrasonic, and then applying the silent coupling agent. You'll get a good bonding to this type of ceramic material. If your lab is doing the etching for you, then yes, cleaning that very well after there has been contamination. It's important to not compromise the bond strength of these restorations. Personally, what we do and what we teach is that the surface treatment of the material is done chairside by the clinician and the assistants after we've tried in the work. We don't like the lab to send that because we just avoid the variable of having a contaminated surface and starting from a contaminated surface. We just prefer to start from zero. And then here, as we can see, we apply the bonding agent to the intaglio surface and then the resin cement. And it's important to apply sufficient resin cement on the intaglio surface of the laminate veneer. So when you seat the veneer, you can have excess of cement 360 degrees around the restoration. That will assure that I'm having a nice marginal seal between the ceramic and the abutment tooth. So it's not exaggerating on the amount of cement that we need to apply in the intaglio, but make sure that it's evenly distributed. So also I don't have any, let's say, spaces in there without cement that could also affect the aesthetics. And this is a very nice work done by Telmo. One more time, he actually in this case did a cutback and apply VITA Lumex ceramic for this type of more natural looking restoration designs. So here you can see this is a pressable material with the CAD print workflow and a partial cutback on the incisal third. So those effects actually come from the inside. Do we do this for every single patient? Not really. Whenever a patient is looking for some brighter shades, we use monolithic veneers and stain and glaze and use the VITA Trilux Forte. But in some cases, when patient is very clear and looking for something much more natural, also we like to do this type of modification. And then to finish, this is case I did more than 5 years ago, and here patient was having concerns about her aesthetic and failing restoration on number 10. So same thing, document the case, put things together, make a digital wax up, study the case. Here I can tell if the diastemas are very wide or not. But we understand that by doing more restorations, we can share better the space missing, distribute the space much better mesiodistally, and come up with a prosthetic design that is going to solve the patient's problems. So here we decide to go for 6 laminate veneers from 6 to 11. And where you see those very wide diastemas between canines and laterals on the right side and central and lateral on the left side, we need to make sure that the laminate veneer wraps around the interproximal surface and is also the margin placed there slightly subgingival, so we can design emergence profile to be able to support that tissue. So take a look here to these preps. You can see on the distal part of number 9 and the mesial part of number 10 how I'm wrapping around the tooth. There's not a vertical finish line in that surface. There's a shoulder going around the cervical portion only, and I want to pack a double second core there and remove it immediately before scanning. So I'm slightly subgingival in that segment. So I give the lab technician the possibility to come from slightly subgingival to be able to support that tissue and close any black triangles. And this is something I see many times. It's not done properly by the clinician, and then the lab is stuck with those preps and they cannot solve the case perfectly. So in this case, we use highly translucent zirconia material. This lab work was done by Sean Han, excellent dental technician. And what I like about these monolithic zirconia, let's say partial coverage restoration or veneers, is that also they mill very smoothly. We know that zirconia is milled on a green stage, and it's milled 20 to 25% bigger, so the burrs have a, let's say, smaller ratio when they're milling a restoration that it's designed much bigger. Of course, it's going to contract when we do the sintering, but this means that there's less over milling on the intaglio surface, no chipping, and then we can finish these type of restorations. Nowadays, we have stain and glaze systems that are fluorescent. So for many of you concerned with that, that's a problem from the past. Nowadays, these newer versions of the stain and glaze systems will compensate for the lack of fluorescency from some of the materials like translucent zirconia. But what we like is the biocompatibility of zirconium oxide. This material started in orthopedics, not in dentistry. And if we understand that the subgingival surface of our zirconia restorations should be polished only without any type of glaze all the way to the margin, we can actually obtain a soft tissue adherence to this surface. This occurs on the abutments when they are highly polished, and this can occur to your ceramic restorations as well if that millimeter or half of a millimeter are properly polished manually and you don't want to take the glaze all the way down. So here you can see between 9 and 10, there's no more of that composite restoration, and we have a nice sharp papilla because that contact point is placed at 5 millimeters of distance to the interproximal bone, and the preparation design permits that the veneers wrap around the interproximal surface, so we give support to the soft tissue. This is part of what we practice and do in my hands-on courses. Focus a lot on porcelain laminate veneers. We just had one last month, and VITA was one of the co-sponsors. So if anyone here is interested in these hands-on courses, I want to share my Instagram account and my email. We can keep in contact. But I think that these are just details that will help you have a better aesthetic outcome when you treat these type of patients. So how to bond zirconia? This is not a myth anymore. It's very clearly documented in the literature. Dr. Platz named it the APC concept. So after trying same protocol, clean them in the ultrasonic with alcohol and then apply the air particle abrasion. Zirconia is not an etchable material. It's to be sandblasted with aluminum oxide 50 microns. Then we need to apply a specific primer that contains MDP. That's what it's going to create that bond to the oxides like zirconium oxide or metal oxide, and then a composite resin cement as we do here. So the APC concept is mandatory for bonding partial coverage zirconia restorations like veneers, or what you see in the photo, an overlay as well, which lets us be more conservative. Okay, so I would like to finish on time. It's 12:59 right now with a few conclusions and then share my contacts before we go to the Q&A session if there's any questions. First thing, when you're doing porcelain laminate veneers, you gotta be extremely cautious and pay more attention to details. That comes from the quality of the photos you take, from the patient's portrait, the diagnostic STL files from your intraoral scans, to be able to correlate those properly and come up with a very nice digital wax-up, which then you will be 3D printing and then creating these putty matrices for a perfect mock-up. That's the foundation of all the treatment. Okay, so we cannot rush these type of cases. Then we have to work more on our hand skills. I've seen very different quality of restorations done by CEREC users, for example, around the world with the same materials, the same blocks, the same staining kits, the same milling machine, the same scanner. Why is the difference? Because some people invest a little more time on understanding how to make that raw restoration look like a natural tube. My recommendation would be always use a multichromatic material. VITA Trilux Forte, honestly, it's my favorite material for laminate veneers because we don't need to worry about too much of the external staining. The color goes on the inside, but also you can apply some specific stains on the external portion to customize it a little bit more when it's needed. But we gotta practice this. As I said, this is something we do in the courses because it might be the weakest link in the therapy. Then, very important, use material-specific instruments. The burr plug for the high-speed burst prep veneers, it's important that we have it. It will give you just a nice enamel-guided preparation due to the reduced depth of the reduction depth cutting burr. Also having those smooth transitions with the extra fine burr. And this applies also for the restorations. We use specific instruments to polish perfectly your ceramics after you do the drying. And maybe you need to adapt a little bit on the interproximal surface. It's important that we polish well. This kit specifically that you see here, this is for acrylic, but many times we gotta work on a nice provisional restoration. And we also gotta have the specific material instruments. That's something that will help us all improve the quality of our dental procedures. And the last thing, as always, make sure we deliver what makes you proud and not compromise the quality of your aesthetics because of rushing, because of time. Personally, I always work much better when I have more time than when I'm in a rush. So those anterior cases, I like to schedule more time and be able to enjoy what I'm doing and make sure that it's something that really makes me feel proud. As I said, digital dentistry is the way we work. There are different options. Some of the cases I feel confident tackling them myself as a chairside CAD/CAM dentist. Some of the cases I go with a connect workflow where I do the clinical and the data acquisition, and I share these to a master ceramist that will help me a lot. So it's nice to have that flexibility and don't always work one way, one material, all the cases the same, because I don't think we have only one technique to solve all the patient's need regarding to anterior ceramic restorations. And I would like to share my contacts. I have this Instagram page, dr.julianconejo, where I only share concepts of dentistry, publications, tips, tricks, photos, etc. So you guys can keep in contact there if you have questions later on, maybe with a patient case, with some photos, material, decision, shade selection, etc. Feel free to contact me there, and also my email. And as I said, I think that we got to invest time in hands-on courses and hands-on sessions, not only the webinars that in the last 2 years have been great, but in a way we still practice dentistry with our hands. So we got to combine the effort of these type of sessions with hands-on materials for sure. So once again, I want to thank the entire team of VITA North America, Jean, Paul, Patrick, everyone for considering me for giving these webinars. It's always very nice to share what I do with the materials that I work on every single day. And hopefully there were some important concepts for you guys there. Or sometimes we don't learn much more, but we do confirm many concepts that are actually working. So I think any of both ways, it's important to always invest some time on good CE. So thank you everyone one more time, and I'm available for a Q&A session if there's any questions. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Doc. I appreciate it. I am going to switch over the presenting here real quick. And So questions, you guys. If you have questions, please ask them now. Also, for other webinars and or previous webinars we've got on our VITA North America YouTube page. So please check our socials. We got lots of stuff there as well. If you guys have questions about any of the products that we talked about today, these are your local sales reps. They can give you more information on pricing and that kind of stuff in your area. And we have several other learning opportunities coming up, so please stay tuned for that. You can also check our VITANorthAmerica.com page under courses that will list all of the courses that are coming up. And then, of course, if you have any technical questions, please reach out to us here at the help desk. Either myself or Jim would be happy to help you guys out. This is our contact information. And then, of course, Dr. King has contact information as well. So I'm gonna, we've got a couple questions coming in here. If you don't mind answering there, Doc. The first one is what is the primer for the zirconia?
Yeah, so as we know, zirconium oxide is not an etchable material, right? So instead of applying hydrofluoric acid as we do with porcelains, we do the treatment with air particle abrasion. These sandblasting, as we know it as well, is done with aluminum oxide particles, 50 micron size, small particle size, at a low pressure, 2 bars of pressure. So it's important that your sandblaster has the ability to adapt the pressure, and we will sandblast for 10 seconds at 1 centimeter, very close, and have the surface, intaglio surface sandblasted completely. Then, as we use conventional silane for silica-based ceramics, like feldspathic ceramics, lithium disilicates, etc., when we're working with oxides like zirconium oxide or titanium oxide, we need to use a primer that contains MDP. Okay, that's the phosphate monomer that has the ability to create that bonding to the oxide layer. Okay, so there are many in the market out there, ceramic primers with MDP. First one, or the gold standard, has been the Panavia system from Carrera and Noritake. They were the pioneers, Japanese material, on this technology. There are other options that have MDP primer. For example, the C Prime from Visco has the MDP. The Monobond Plus from Ivoclar can be perfectly used for the surface treatment of zirconia restorations. Okay, so it's important to double check the composition of what you're using for zirconia primer. So that's a very good question, and I hope this was able to answer.
No, that's great. Actually, and there's a follow-up on that one. They're asking, can the lab place primer before they deliver it to the doctor?
Yeah, this is also from Eric, right? So, you know, Eric, there's a really good study coming from Tokyo Medical Dental University. It actually shows that if you sandblast the intaglio surface of the zirconia restoration immediately before applying the primer and delivering the restoration, you obtain higher bond strength that if the lab does the sandblasting, and maybe it's been 3 days since that or a week since that happened, and then you go ahead and apply the primer. So that's why I said we teach and we practice that we do the surface treatment and all the steps of the bonding process, because we know that an issue here, a miscommunication here, a contamination here, will basically jeopardize the success of the restoration. So my suggestion, I would say, get a good sandblaster. We have ones from Remford, German company. Get the aluminum oxide, and you do that, or your staff does that for you, and you're gonna always have a more reactive surface for that MDP primer if you do it right there in the clinic after trying the restoration, cleaning in the ultrasonic with alcohol, doing the sandblasting, and then applying the primer. So because many clinicians delegate that to the lab, that's why we need those zirconia cleaners, right? My favorite one would be the katana cleaner. Why? Because it's the only one that can be used for both the restoration and the tooth preparation. Many times we still have temporary cement on the abutment tooth, so you can use the katana cleaner to clean not only the entire surface but the preparation as well. So if sandblasting in the clinic after trying and cleaning is not possible, then a cleaner is needed. Okay.
Terrific. Another question, what DSD software did you use for the wax up design?
Okay, so for the first one where I showed the 3 photos of the patient, and that was the Digital Smile Design app, the DSD app. Nowadays, you only get access to that if you're user of DSD concept and have the DSD basically clinic. There's another one very nice out there called SmileFly that it's open, and it's very similar and has even artificial intelligence on. That's if you're talking more of app type of design software where you can design from your iPad with the iPen or even your smartphone. And then most of the other cases, the digital wax-ups were made whether with the InLab software from Dentsply Sirona or the ExoCut software. And I actually don't do those wax-ups myself. I just capture the information and send that to the lab and meet, whether it's a team viewer or WhatsApp call, and go through the main concerns from the patient towards the aesthetic. I like to discuss and have very clear what is the patient looking for, so we're all on the same page.
Excellent. We got a couple more here for you. The first one is do you think machinable material is better than pressable?
I think that both techniques are very reliable. If you don't prep really well, pressable can help you because there's a person there making a lot of miracles for us, right? There's a person there grinding on the intaglio and sitting that on a die, but it takes time and it's probably more cost, or has a higher cost. If you do milling, if you understand how to mill, if you have the correct burrs as we showed, then you can obtain very good marginal adaptation as well with milling. Milling has the flexibility that if you mill one veneer and you don't like exactly the color on a A1, you can mill it right there on a B1 and solve the situation. So that's what I'm saying, that both techniques are valuable, and we just gotta choose what would be better for our clinic, for our scenario. A pressable material gives you overall very high marginal adaptation, very good marginal adaptation conditions. But I think that with the knowledge that we have nowadays in 2022, we obtain excellent marginal adaptation with milling as well. And we can be, as I said, very consistent.
Excellent. I've got one gentleman here who's asking, he's an old school analog tech, and he's wanting to move into the digital, starting on ExoCAD, but would like to, if you have any recommendations on any groups or people to connect with to learn more. And I know that we offer courses here all of the time, so Brian, if you want to reach out to me here at the help desk, I can help with that. I don't know if Dr. Conejo, you have any suggestions?
Yeah, actually, Brian, I think that Paul would be a great contact. He works in the industry. He knows many lab technicians that have education centers dedicated to this type of concepts that you're looking for. So I would highly, motivate you, go for it. And it's exactly what you've been doing for many years, as you said, but with different tools. But you will like a lot what you can achieve. So Paul, you can take that one further, right?
Terrific. Yeah. Yeah. So get a hold of me, Brian, and I'll be happy to help you out with that. Another question is the size of the retraction cord you used.
Okay. So, when we're studying perio, we know that there are thin biotypes and thick biotypes, right? And thin biotypes are more prone to recessions and in some cases irreversible recessions. So those are the cases that we as prosthodontists or restorative dentists, we fail, right? If we have that scenario. So basically, I just treat every single patient as a thin biotype. I'm always thinking that this patient, this tooth might have an irreversible recession if I'm using a thick cord, if I'm rushing when I'm packing the cord, or if I use a very heavy cord. Okay, so I only use the 000 retraction cord as my first cord, and then I use 00 or 0. I never use anything thicker than that. And also, it's very important that you try to reduce as much as possible the time that the cord is packed in the sulcus. So those things will help you have less chances of creating any damages.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question back to the sandblasting of the zirconia. Can you repeat the PSI you use on that?
2 bars.
2 bar. Okay.
Yeah, 2 bars. Low pressure, small particle size, 50 microns.
Excellent. And then one more from Eric, who's asking, does contamination occur on the Trian after placing the MVP primer? If the lab does the primer and doctor does the Trian before cementation.
Yeah. So I think I explained this before. My recommendation, based on scientific evidence, not really from our group, but from, I would say, the best source on that topic, is that every restoration will get contaminated when we try it in. There's saliva, there's chemical components there from the hemostatics, there's blood. So every time you try a restoration, take it out from the mouth, clean it on the ultrasonic with alcohol for 3 minutes, dry it well, and do the air abrasion if you're working with zirconia. That way, you're going to be starting from a very clean surface, and you can assure proper bond strength to zirconia. Okay? When we don't want to follow the steps of the techniques described that are shown to work, then that's where issues can happen, and we don't know exactly what the issue was. So we try to just be extra careful and do that ourselves. That's our day-to-day, and those are our working protocols that I could highly recommend. Something else I wouldn't like to recommend if I really don't know where an issue could come. So if I don't have a sandblaster in my clinic, then, well, I will tell the lab to do that while I am able to buy one, but that's it. Then I will clean the restoration and I will apply the primer myself. I wouldn't let the lab apply the zirconia primer, if that answers your question.
Terrific, thank you. I've got one more from Ryan here that's asking, what milling machine do you use for your VITA block materials? And I can help with part of that in saying that we, for our VITA blocks, we have several different mandrels that fit most of the common milling machines that are out there. So if you have specific questions on machines, email me or call me and I can get you a list of everything that we have available. But Dr. Conejo, specifically, what do you use, or do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, exactly. Paul will know all the different holders available for the different machines. I know that, of course, we use a lot of the CEREC MCXL milling machine. And what you see on the screen on the lower right side, that holder, that's for the CEREC. We also have Planmeca mills, and VITA provides the same blocks with the Planmeca holder. And Paul, I'm just curious, there's I think one or two more, right, holders for other systems?
Yeah, I don't have them all off the top of my head, but we have, the Planmeca, we've got the Universal, we've got the CEREC, and I think there's a couple more that we have as well, depending on the material and the needs. So if people have questions, they can get a hold of me and I can get them more specifics.
Perfect. Yeah, and many other milling machines, actually, they have an adapter to the CEREC holder. So we basically can use these VITA blocks for any type of milling machine. Great questions.
Terrific. Well, it looks like that is most of the questions. Thank you again, Doc, for taking the time and sharing all your your wonderful knowledge with us. Lots of good feedback here. Lots of people really appreciate it. So thank you again. If anybody has any more questions, you can either contact Dr. Conejo, he gave you his info, or you can contact me at the help desk, and we are always here to help. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time on our next VITA Learning webinar.
Thank you.
Have a good morning.
Bye.